Hello, my fantastic math students. So today we have another lesson. So again, this is in Algebra 1. Make sure you title your notes this. This is going to be lesson 1-7. It's going to be the distributive property and like terms. So we're going over a couple more properties that we had covered in lesson 1-3. So let's talk about the distributive property. But before we do that, I want you to hit pause and copy down all the stuff behind me, and then I'll go over and explain it. All right, so now that you have it copied down in your notes, I'll go through. So we have the distributive property. Now I put this deliver in quotations because this is not a mathematical definition. This is my own, right? So it's like delivering a number or a variable. We know what a variable is, x, y, using multiplication or times. So let's take a look how it looks in algebra. So in algebra, they all have an A, parentheses, a B, plus a C, right? So with the distributive property, we're going to take this A and we're going to deliver it or pass it out, or if I want to use the right term, distribute the A to the letter B. Well, there it is. The A has been passed over to the B. Then I go A and I technically multiply it by the C or pass it out also, and you have AC. And whenever you put two letters close together, that means multiplication. So you have AB plus AC. And that's the distributive property. And again, even if they put a minus sign or if they use negative C, you take that A and you're going to pass it or deliver it to the things inside the parentheses. So you get an AB, there's the A, there's my minus sign, and then I put AC. But again, there's the A. Now this one's a little bit more complicated because now, if you've noticed, I have a negative variable, or this might be a negative number. So you have to be a little bit careful with the negatives. Because if you go in negative times this letter B, which appears to be positive, I get a negative AB. Right? But where it gets tricky is this is a negative C. Now it looks like minus C, like this one does. But if you were to cover up the B, see how it looks like a negative C? So when I go A and I distribute it to the negative C, right, I distributed it to the B, I'm going to distribute it to the C. Well, two negatives when you multiply become positive, and that's why this is a plus sign instead of a minus sign. Or another way of thinking about this is if you have a negative on the outside of the parentheses that's going to be passed out, it's going to change these guys' sign. He was a positive number or a positive term. He was a negative term. Well, look. Now that's a negative term and that's a positive term. Right? Now let's look at some math problems. So over here, I used one with just plain numbers. So I have a 4 times, parentheses, 2 plus 3. Now watch, same thing. I do, some people like to call it the double rainbow. But again, you're distributing or multiplying that 4 to both of these numbers. So what I do is I packaged up the 4 like it was a box, and this is UPS, and I'm going to deliver it to this person's house. So I'm taking the number 4, packaging it up, and I'm going to deliver it to the 2. Now again, when you place two numbers close together, you have to put parentheses around one of them so it looks like 4 times 2. If you don't, it's just going to look like 42. Now I take that same package, the 4, and I'm going to pass it or deliver it to the 3. And there it is. Now here, because they're numbers, we can actually do the math. So we go 4 times 2 is 8, and 4 times 3 is 12. And because these are still plain numbers or constants, you can add them up and you get 20. But I want to show you also why this works. How do I know that this is the same as that. Watch this. If I take 2 plus 3, and let's do that. So we agree that 2 plus 3 is 5. Well, again, if two numbers are close together, that means multiplication. So I go 4 times 5, and I get 20. Right? So that's why the distributive property works. So now let's look at one that you'll actually more see in our worksheets and in our book. So they're going to give you maybe a number on the outside, and they're going to give you two terms on the inside. One's going to be like an x, and a minus 8 or a negative 8. Depends on how you like to look at it. So again, what do? I take the 3. I distribute it. I pass it out to the x. So I have 3 times x. I put my minus sign, and I go 3 times, and I pass it out to the 8. So there's my minus sign. There's my 3 times 8. So here, when I do the math, 3 times x is just 3x. That means times. Here, we can actually do math. 3 times 8 is 24. Now, unlike this problem, as soon as I get to here, you're done. Don't combine me. Don't tell me that this makes 21, negative 21x. You leave it just like this. And here's a big clue. If you have two things inside the parentheses, you can have two things for your answer. Now, let's get back to that one that was a little bit tricky because it had the negative sign on it. Okay? So we're going to start off, and I use two different colors for this. So we have a negative 7, right? And I have a 5g minus 4. So I'm going to take that negative 7 and distribute it out. So I have negative 7 to my 5g. Now, this is where it gets tricky. I'm going to write this as a minus sign. So that's why I kept it blue. But again, I'm passing out a negative 7. So here's my negative 7. And I'm going to times it by the 4. Now, if you go to do this math, I go negative 7 times 5 will give me a negative 35g. Now, remember I've told you in the past, if you have a minus sign next to a negative sign, you can make those positive. So if you have a minus and a negative, you can turn them into a plus sign. So I'm going to turn it into a plus sign and then go 7 times 4 is 28. Now, some of you, that's going to be a little bit tricky, or some might find it easier just to do this. That's a positive, that's a negative. So a negative times a positive is always going to give you a negative. If you cover up the 5g, that makes it look like a negative 4. When you multiply two negatives, you get a positive 28. So we're going to have on the homework a lot of practice with these negative numbers out in front of the parentheses. So I'm going to put up some examples real quick. All right, so go ahead and write down these two examples. So example A and example B. If you want to challenge yourself, hit pause right now and try to do these on your own. So again, hopefully you tried these and let's see if your answers match. So I have 4 times the quantity x plus 1. So I'm very visual, so I like to do the little rainbows. I like to write the 4 next to the x. So there's my 4, there's my x plus, again, you're distributing the 4 to both. So I have 4 times x, 4x, plus 4 times 1 is 4. You're done. You see, you have two things inside the parentheses, you have two things down here. So on this one, I'll do one little shortcut. I will skip this part. I'll just do the double, or in this case, the triple rainbow. And I'm going to take that 4 and I'm going to pass it out to the x and get 4x. Take the 4, pass it out to that positive y, put 4y. And then take the 4 and pass it out to the letter z and get 4z. And again, as many terms as I have inside the parentheses is what your answer should be. Here's two more examples, C and D. So go ahead and write down a fraction. I know, just scared most of you. So you have 1/2 times the quantity 4x minus 10. And then here, I don't even have a number. I don't even have a letter of the alphabet. So I have this negative sign being times by x and -7. So take a moment, try it. All right, so now if you multiply by the fraction 1/2, it just means you cut things in half, right? So if I have a 4x, it just means cut the 4 in half. But again, you do have to distribute it. This time I'm going to write it 1/2 times 4x minus, and there's my 1/2 again, times 10, right? Well, half of 4 is 2, so it's going to be a 2x. And then half of a 10 is 5. And remember, this has subtraction in the middle. Or, if it was at -10, half of -10, it would be -5. Now let's look at this one that has the negative, but it has no letter of the alphabet and no number, right? Well, you're still going to distribute or pass out that negative. And this is all done through multiplication. But let me tell you a little secret. There is a number here. It's just a lot of times we don't show it. And that number is a 1. And it still might be hard to see, and I want it to be somewhat hard to see because it is an invisible 1. So this is actually a -1. I'll make it more visible right now. So there's a -1, and we're going to be multiplying it by the x. Then I'm going to take that -1, and this time I'm not going to put the minus sign. I'm going to see this as a -7. I'm going to go -1 times my -7. Okay. So, -1 times x is -1x. And a negative times a negative makes a positive. So I drop down a +7, but how do I show it's positive? I'll put a plus sign in between. Now, again, a lot of times we don't show -1s. So I'm going to rewrite this ditching the 1, but I will keep my negative sign, +7. And this I would consider my final and best answer. I'll give you full credit for this. I have no problem if you want to show me the 1. Or, here's the other trick. A negative sign will always change everything to the opposite. So, if you take a look, positive x, now it's what? Negative x. -7, +7. And that just might be easier for you to do. So if you ever see a minus sign right in front of parentheses, whatever's on the inside, just take their opposites. All right? So, I'm going to hit pause on this video. And I haven't gotten to the like terms yet. So there's going to be a 1-7B video right after this. So make sure that you have everything written down about the distributive property. And you have a math-tastic day.